is just something so satisfying about making things go boom. And when you make those things go boom and they are frozen, it is that much more satisfying. Something dark inside you triggers, wakes when that happens. And that is basically what this build is going to do. What is up, you damn gorgeous and beautiful gamers? Welcome back to the role-playing games to this merry old night date. And I would like to discuss about RPGs, like the content, like never super appreciated. No, still that you're a gorgeous and beautiful person. You are indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. So let's talk about the build before we actually start building the build on itself. The video is going to be divided into different sections that you will be able to find on the video description. A lot of people have been requesting for me to give you the written thing of the build, so I'm going to have that thing on the video description. You are going to be able to look at that up and just basically tweak whatever you would like to tweak about this build. But basically what this thing is going to do is that it's just a ninja, dude. It's just a ninja that is going to explode things. It is not going to be that amazing on single targets, because this build, like most of the builds that we use for endgame, they basically focus themselves on being amazing on dealing AoE damage. And what this thing is going to do is it's just going to make things explode. And those things that are going to be exploding, they are going to be frozen. And since they are going to be frozen, that little crystallized sound of things shattering, that's what makes this thing all worth it. And the awesome thing about it all is that you are going to be able to use this build both for endgame and for leveling as well. It levels perfectly, it levels beautifully, and also on endgame you are most definitely going to be able to spam this thing like there is no tomorrow. But yeah, that being said, let's begin with the skills of the build. And like always, I do not wish to waste your time that much. You'll have you can take a screenshot right here, but if you do not want to take a screenshot right here, do have in mind that this will also be on the video description, so you're going to be able to consult it anytime that you want. I'm just going to briefly tell you what is it that you are going to need, what kind of synergies are you going to be using, and we're going to be speaking more in depth about all of these things on the rotation section of the video. This is going to be very, very important, so this is something that you should always have. We're going to have, like always, puncture, just to cause vulnerable on the enemies. Our main skill of damage skill is going to be flurry. Flurry is going to make enemies vulnerable whenever you make... First, you're going to attack with puncture, and then you're going to make them vulnerable with flurry. And then the rotations that you are going to be using, it's going to be in between shadow imbuements and cold imbuements. But you could also switch cold from to poison if you want to make that poison explosion build. This is the dark ice build, so it is what it is. We have our points right here just to make our imbuements that much more strong. And we're not going to have this little thing right here because we don't really care about the movement speed of the enemies. At the end of the day, we are going to deal with the enemies with just one tap of this little thing, so there is no need for this thing right here. We are using Shadow Step and Dash mainly to recover our energy, but we are also going to be using one specific aspect to recover as much energy as possible. But these guys are working on synergy with this one right here, which is going to increase your adrenaline gain, your energy gain, when you move around. And since you are always going to be moving around, you're always going to be using that regen for energy. And that is basically everything that you need to know about this. Those are the passives that we're doing. This is just more damage passives, this is just more energy, this is just more energy. This one right here is more damage, and this one is right here is survivability. We're going to be using a synergy between this little guy right here on our build, on the gear and legendary aspect sections of the build. So a lot of this stuff you're not going to necessarily need it. This is just going overkill. This is just the stuff that I have right here is just the things that you need to have to make the ultimate build like this work. And the things that you do not need is going to be Frostburn. Frostburn is going to make you that much more of a cold dark ninja, because this thing, it freezes enemies on a lucky hit, so it is something nice as well. The penitent grips, I've come around those little things quite often, I have to say, so they're not that hard to come by. But if you not have the Penitent Grief, then you can most definitely change these two guys right here. Usually we're always going to have our main skill damage locked in here, and since our main damage skill is Flurry, we are going to have the aspect of Encircling Blades right here to increase the damage potential of our Flurry by 200%, because we have right here on our two-handed weapon. And then we have Aspect of Stable Imbuements. This is just going to cost more DPS when we cast our imbuements. And then you also have the Aspect of Corruption, which the imbuement skill effects have 20 to 40% extra effect on vulnerable enemies. We're going to be speaking about that a little bit later in the video. There's some kind of rotation that you do need to have in mind before we actually start doing our last imbuement stuff kind of things. Then we have the Icy Alchemist aspect, which is going to be that much more effective because we have shield and frozen enemies always, at all times. Mother's Embrace. It is just nice to have this thing to work a little bit with our energy, because like I said, we do have a lot of energy consumption, and our Flurry is not self-sustainable like many of the other skills, core skills that we have, so we do have a little bit more of energy right here. Then we have the Vengeful aspect. This thing is going to increase our critical strike chance every time that we make enemies vulnerable. So yeah, that's just basically more DPS. These two right here, these are just protection stuff that you should be using. Yeah, it's just stuff for survivability. This one is going to give you a barrier for dealing damage to enemies' elites. And then we have the Always Reliable Protecting aspect right here, although I would advise for this to be instead right here in the amulet if you can afford it. Maybe if you not have the Frostburn, then you can basically place the Vengeful aspect into your gloves and then change this thing right here onto the amulet, because it increases the immunity that the bubble provides to you. And then finally we have the Aspect of Cruel Sustenance, which is basically explosions from the victimized key passive heal you for a set amount of life that you deal onto the enemy. So this is the defensive buff that you are going to have on your pants, and since you're always going to have explosion from your victimized, then you're always going to be healing yourself. And basically that is the legendary aspects that you are going to have in this build. With the Paragon, now the Paragon is very interesting. It really does not matter that much everything else. The main thing, you can play around with this thing, you are still going to get stronger, but the one thing that you're always going to take for this build and that you're going to max out, regardless of you want to have more survivability on your Paragon points or your damage, the main one that you're going to be taking is going to be Eldritch Bounty. This is going to increase the damage of the imbuements, and every time that you go into the Eldritch Bounty right here, the non-physical damage, all of these notes that you have right here, they are going to increase the shadow damage and the ice damage, increasing your DPS that much more. So it is very important that you take the Eldritch Bounty and you take this kind of notes. Also for the glyphs that you are going to be using right here, be sure to use, for example, Canny, which is increased non-physical damage. Again, it is just going to increase your imbuements damage, so that is always a nice thing. Exploit Weakness. Exploit Weakness, again, it's always going to increase the damage you deal to vulnerable enemies. And once we speak about the rotations, which is just right now, you're always going to have vulnerable enemies. The rotations, you can switch them a little bit. The main thing is that you are going to cast Shadow Imbuements with your dash. Once you dash into the enemies, you are going to make them, you're going to cause that debuff onto the enemies, and once you kill just one, they are going to start exploding. But before you actually kill an enemy, that is, if they not die by the second dash, because that's something that actually usually does happen when you dash into the enemies and they are already with the shadow imbuement. Sometimes they die because they start exploding. So yeah, that is something that happens very often. But if you manage to not kill the enemies at this point, you are going to have to use puncture, just one puncture on one enemy, which is going to make them vulnerable. and then you make the rest of them vulnerable by 1 cast of Flurry. After that, you cast your cold imbuements and watch everything beautifully explode around you. It is a little bit of a preparation. It does require quite a little bit of preparation, but that is how you're going to reach the highest amount of damage possible. But if you want to just play it simple, if you not want to dwell that much in it, then just basically use the Shadow Imbuement, Dash, and then Cold Imbuement, Flurry. Or you can switch around. Use your Dash and Cold Imbuement, although I'd not advise for this to happen that much, because when you dash with your Shadow Imbuements, you are giving the enemies time to get back to you. And when you give enemies time to get back to you, as soon as you cast the Cold Imbuement with your Flurry, they are going to be that much more closer for them to explode in this crystallized frozen form, and you're always going to be dealing that much crystallized critical damage to the enemies because of your legendary aspects and passive things that you have. And that is the build. It is very, very fun to play. It is amazing to play. You can use this thing to level up, or you can use this thing to play an endgame. But if you like the content and like the very super appreciated, and also today you're gorgeous and beautiful person, you are indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. I will be seeing you goddamn gorgeous and beautiful people in the next one. Have a beautiful day, and goodbye.